The crash of shattering glass, scream, blood streamed down his face. Jim Morrison never saw it coming, but maybe he should have. That night, when Janis Joplin smashed a bottle of Southern Comfort over the Lizard King's head, wasn't just another wild chapter in rock history, it was a declaration of war. But what could drive one of music's most electrifying women to violence against rock's dark prince? What did Jim Morrison do to provoke such wrath? Why did Janis Joplin harbor such deep loathing for him? Their story is darker than fans ever imagined. They were icons standing on opposite edges of the same burning stage. Janis, a ferocious blues storm with a voice that thundered and a soul laid bare. Jim, a seductive poet cloaked in mystery and menace. The Doors frontman who walked the line between genius and self-destruction. They weren't just stars. They were symbols, myths for a generation desperate to escape war, repression, and quiet despair. On stage, they embodied rebellion and raw freedom. Offstage, their lives unraveled like cursed verses of a forgotten song. Janis was a live wire. Her voice wasn't refined, but it tore straight through the soul. She didn't mask her pain. She amplified it. Every note she sang carried heartbreak, rage, and fierce defiance. And Jim? He was all contradiction. Worshipped as a visionary, feared in private. He could hold a room captive with a whisper, and obliterate it with a scream. He was addicted not just to substances, but to spectacle, chaos, and the fleeting high of being. Worshipped, yet fundamentally alone. They should have been kindred spirits instead. Their collision left a wound no one spoke of for years, just rumors, wrapped in haze. Fans chalked it up to another wild night from the psychedelic era. But there was more to it, something darker. Janis didn't just dislike Morrison. She saw through him, saw the violence glamorized as artistry, saw how fame forgave men like him while it devoured women like her. What could ignite that level of hatred in someone who had already endured a lifetime of cruelty? To answer that, we have to go back to a small Texas town that tried to silence a girl whose voice was too loud, too raw, and far too real. Before she was a legend, Janis Joplin was a misfit girl with a voice full of pain. Long before the spotlight, before Woodstock, before the crowd screamed her name, she was just another outcast in Port Arthur, Texas. A town that prized silence over rebellion, conformity over color. And Janis, she was everything that town feared. Loud, unapologetic, different from her teenage years. She wore her defiance openly, like a second skin. And for that, she paid dearly. Her face, scarred by severe acne, became a bullseye for cruelty. Her weight fluctuated. Her clothes defied the mold of the Southern belle. And in a deeply segregated town, her vocal support of civil rights made her more than unusual. It made her dangerous in the eyes of the old guard. School wasn't hard. It was hell. Janis wasn't teased. She was brutalized, mocked in the halls, isolated in classrooms, ridiculed until each day felt like another public execution of her spirit. The emotional wounds she carried from those years didn't fade. They sank into her bones. While her classmates clung to pop songs and small-town dreams, Janis was chasing something else entirely, something raw, something real. She found it in the blues. In the aching voices of Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, led belly singers who didn't just express pain, they inhabited it. To Janis, they weren't just influences. They were lifelines. She followed that lifeline into college, hoping for a clean slate. But neither Lamar State College of Technology nor the University of Texas offered sanctuary. The bullying followed her like a shadow. And at UT Austin, it reached a cruel crescendo. A fraternity voted her ugliest man on campus. It wasn't a prank. It was targeted humiliation meant to break her. Nearly it did. The laughter that echoed through the dorm halls that day stayed with her for the rest of her life. But something changed inside her. The pain didn't consume her, it ignited her. The more they tried to silence her, the louder her soul began to scream. That scream, over time, became her voice. Janis didn't sing with polish or precision. She sang with fire. Her voice cracked and bled, roared and shook. It held every heartbreak, every insult, every lonely night she spent wishing she could disappear. And when that voice finally filled stadiums, it still carried the ache of the girl no one clapped for in high school. Janis Joplin didn't escape her pain, she repurposed it, and in doing so, she gave voice to every outcast who had ever been told they were too loud, too strange, too much. Every performance was a reckoning. Every song was a scream hurled back at a world that once tried to bury her. But behind the powerhouse voice was a woman still searching desperately for comfort, and she found it in a bottle. That bottle of Southern comfort wasn't just a drink, it was armor, shield against a world that had never shown her mercy. Watch any footage of Janis on stage barefoot, wild-haired feather boas fluttering, tinted glasses shielding her eyes, and you'll see it there, the amber bottle, clutched like a talisman. To audiences, it looked like part of her bohemian mystique. To Janis, it was survival gear. Southern comfort didn't just loosen her up before a show, it dulled the sharp edges of reality. It built a barrier between her fragile, flayed nerves and the roaring crowds who expected her to bleed emotion every time she opened her mouth. It numbed the voice in her head, the one still whispering cruel words from Port Arthur, the one still calling her the ugliest man on campus. Offstage, she was still that anxious girl, still seeking love, still trying to quiet the echo of a lifetime of rejection. But on stage, with enough Southern comfort in her system, she could become what they wanted. Fierce, fearless, feral. She didn't sip it, she swallowed it like medicine, like salvation. Like the antidote to memory, the bottle became so entwined with her image that the brand eventually sent her a full-length lynx fur coat and matching hat free of charge, not as payment, but as tribute. Janis wore it proudly, not because she cared about the brand, but because, for once, it felt like the world was giving her something. Not just taking, but what no one saw, what no one wanted to see, was that the drink that freed her on stage was quietly imprisoning her. Offstage, what started as a confidence booster hardened into dependency. The bottle followed her everywhere. 2 interviews, backstage dressing rooms, hotel beds. Lonely moments when the applause faded and the silence closed in, behind the flamboyant clothes. An untamed laugh was a woman battling a darkness that Southern comfort could briefly drown, but never kill. And alcohol wasn't her only addiction. She was also hopelessly addicted to a kind of love that always slipped through her fingers, intense, consuming, fleeting, the kind that burned bright, then vanished, leaving her aching for something more permanent, more real, more gentle than the chaos she'd grown used to. For someone whose songs tore open the ribcage of heartbreak, Janis Joplin knew the sting of love all too intimately. Behind the rebel persona lived a woman aching for tenderness, for safety, for someone who could see past the legend and love the scarred, vulnerable girl underneath. Her romantic life wasn't some sweeping, tragic love story. It was a mosaic of brief, consuming flames, connections that flared hot and burned out fast. Janis gave everything. She held nothing back. But too often, the men she chose were enamored with the myth, not the woman. They were drawn to the fire she lit on stage, but shrank from the intensity she carried off it. They wanted Janis the icon, not Janis the soul. One of the clearest glimpses into her romantic heartbreak came in 1968 at the Chelsea Hotel in New York. She'd reportedly been looking for Chris Christopherson, her off-again muse, but instead crossed paths with Leonard Cohen. What followed was a brief, fragile encounter, something deeply personal for Janis. Then something Cohen later immortalized with cool detachment in his song Chelsea Hotel #2. For him, it was art. For her, it was another moment of giving everything and receiving almost nothing in return. But Janis didn't bury her heartbreak. She sang it. Songs like Piece of My Heart and Cry Baby weren't just performances, they were emotional exorcisms. Every note carried the weight of rejection, of longing, of that primal hunger to be seen and loved without conditions. When Janis sang about love, it wasn't soft or sweet. It was a war cry, a plea. A white flag soaked in tears. She wasn't begging for fame. She already had that. She was begging for something much rarer. To be chosen. To be kept. To be someone's first and only. That ache, that bottomless yearning, became the lifeblood of her music. It's why, even half a century later, her voice still slices through time and lands. It's like a raw nerve. Because she wasn't trying to be perfect. She was trying to be true, and true love always seemed just out of reach. She could make thousands scream her name, but she could never make one person stay. Then came the night she met Jim Morrison, a night that would peel back the glittering curtain of rock's golden age and reveal something far darker. And by the end of it, Janis would walk away with one more reason to keep that bottle close. It seemed brilliant at first. Paul Rothschild, the visionary producer behind both The Doors and Janis, the wild idea. Bring the two most magnetic forces in music together. The king and queen of the counterculture, two raw, volcanic talents. Two wild souls circling the same sun. His comments turned crude, his flirtation soured into something darker, more entitled. Jim Morrison was no longer speaking to Janis Joplin, the artist. He was speaking to Janis Joplin, the object. The conquest. She recognized the shift instantly. She'd lived with it her whole life. Men, fascinated by her fire, intoxicated by her stage presence, only to recoil or attempt to dominate her when they came too close to the real thing. Janis had always been too much for them, too loud, too raw, too complicated. And she was tired of playing along, as Morrison's behavior escalated from charm to aggression. She quietly decided she'd had enough. It wasn't the first party that had turned toxic, and Janis had mastered the escape. Her old station wagon was parked just outside, a familiar getaway from 1,000 nights gone wrong. She was halfway into the driver's seat when he came after her drunk, volatile and unwilling to be dismissed. Then it happened. Without warning, Morrison lunged. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her back with enough force to make her cry out in pain. That single, savage act crossed every line, and something inside Janis snapped. A lifetime of humiliation, objectification, being treated as less than all of it boiled over in one blistering second. She didn't hesitate. Her hand found the bottle of Southern Comfort beside her, and with a roar of fury, she swung. Glass shattered. The bottle cracked against his head with a sickening thud. A burst of blood and booze exploding into the night. Morrison collapsed, stunned, bleeding silent. The Lizard King lay dethroned, sprawled in the dirt, baptized. In the very drink that had kept Janis breathing, the party went still. No one moved. No one dared speak. Janis got in the car, drove away. Said nothing. To outsiders it might have looked like another wild night in the golden age of rock and roll. But to Janis, it was more than drama. It was a declaration. That bottle wasn't just a weapon of chance. It was a line in the sand. Furious stand against every man who had tried to silence her, reduce her, rewrite her. What happened between Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison wasn't just some drunken clash at a Hollywood house party. It was a collision between two worlds. Hers, where pain was a burden she had to carry in full view, and his, where pain became poetry only when filtered through male brilliance. Janis saw Morrison for what he was, a man who cloaked himself in chaos and got praised for it, a man whose cruelty could be romanticized as art. She had spent her life being torn apart for her flaws. Her voice was too raw, her look too strange, her soul too exposed. Jim could stumble, rage, stray and be crowned a genius for the wreckage to Janis. He wasn't just another difficult man in music. He was the living symbol of the double standard that had haunted her from Port Arthur to the Chelsea Hotel. What she endured was punishment. What he embodied became legend. And what made it worse? What twisted the knife was what came out years later, long after Janis was gone, in the years after Janis Joplin's death. Multiple women stepped forward with disturbing accounts of Jim Morrison's behavior. Judy Huddleston, one of his former lovers, described chilling moments, emotional manipulation, sudden bursts of violence, and physical abuse. She recalled him pinning her down, ignoring her pleas, transforming from charming to terrifying in the blink of an eye. Pamela Corson, Morrison's longtime partner, once recounted him slapping her across the face at a club for no reason at all. Even John Dinsmore, the Doors' own drummer, admitted to witnessing Morrison hold a knife to a woman in one of his darker, alcohol-fueled spirals. These weren't wild rock and roll embellishments. They were patterns, and Janis Joplin saw those patterns before the world was ready to. Her fury at that Hidden Hills party wasn't just about having her hair yanked or being humiliated in public. It was about what Morrison represented, the very kind of man she'd spent her entire life trying to survive, the entitled, destructive male elevated for his chaos, while women like her were punished for theirs. Janis never went to the press. She didn't issue statements or call for retribution, but those closest to her knew how deeply she despised him. They saw it in the way her face changed at the mention of his name, and the way her voice would ice over if someone brought up the Doors. She refused to work with him, refused to be seen with him, refused to pretend it was just some drunken misunderstanding. Her silence was not surrender, it was resistance. Janis didn't want pity. She wanted respect, and that meant refusing to participate in the mythology that excused men like Morrison while crucifying women like her. She saw him clearly. Long before the world caught up, they would both join the tragic ranks of the 27 club artists who burned too bright and died too young. But where Morrison's death only deepened his legend, casting him in marble as a misunderstood genius, Janis left behind something far more valuable, a legacy of truth. In her final months, she recorded what would become her masterpiece, Pearl, an album that didn't just showcase her power, it revealed her growth, her vulnerability, her expanding creative vision. Songs like Me and Bobby McGee and Mercedes-Benz weren't just radio hits, they were confessions, unvarnished, unfiltered, unapologetically real. And that's why her voice still cuts through the noise decades later. Where Morrison's myth often obscured the man, Janis's truth made her more human, more enduring. She wasn't worshipped as some distant god. She was embraced as one of us, a woman who turned pain into poetry, rejection into resonance, loneliness into legacy. Perhaps the most telling difference between them can be found in one quiet moment, an act so small, so rarely mentioned, and yet so profound. In the final year of her life, while battling her own demons, Joplin did something few ever knew about. She quietly paid for a proper headstone for Bessie Smith, the blues legend who had died in 1937 and had lain in an unmarked grave for decades. There was no press release, no cameras, no performance. It was a private act of reverence. A blues sister honoring the woman who had once given her permission to scream. Janis made sure that Bessie would never be forgotten again. That simple gesture says everything about who Janis really was, in a world that had tried again and again to erase her. She refused to let another woman's voice be silenced, and maybe that's what truly separates Janis from Jim Morrison. While Morrison worked tirelessly to build his mythology, Lizard King, the shamanic poet, Janis was doing something braver. She was telling the truth. No masks, no riddles, no person is just raw, unfiltered vulnerability. She stood naked in her pain, wore her wounds like medals, and in doing so, became more than a rock star. She became a beacon for every person who's ever felt too strange, too emotional, too loud, too much for the world. 50 years later, as we begin to question the myths we built around the icons of the 60s, Janis's legacy doesn't die, it intensifies. Because she wasn't just ahead of her time musically, she was ahead of her time culturally. She saw the patterns, the abuse, the double standards, the way men were crowned kings for their chaos, while women were crucified for theirs, and she refused to play along in the end. Both Janis and Jim left us too soon. Both carved their names into the walls of music history. But while Morrison left behind mystery, Janis left behind something far more valuable. Truth, not wrapped in poetry, not hidden behind myth, but pulsing, bleeding, burning with a fierce honesty that still liberates anyone who's ever felt like an outsider. She didn't just sing the blues, she lived them. And then miraculously, turned them into a legacy of healing. For every misfit, for every rebel, for everyone who's ever been told they're too loud, too strange, too emotional. To real Janis Joplin didn't just give us music. She gave us permission to be exactly who we are. Because in a world that demands conformity, being unapologetically yourself isn't just art. It's revolution. And that bottle of Southern comfort wasn't just a crutch. It was her declaration of independence.